What's a dead giveaway that someone has never been poor? Why can't your parents just give you the money? Said by someone I know whose parents still buys pretty much everything they want or need even at age 40. Not second guessing a large purchase, regardless of whether they can afford it or not. I've been working my butt off for the last 3 years to be financially well off. Right now I'm at the point where I do not live paycheck to paycheck anymore and can afford luxury purchases. But I still can't spend $200 on freaking clothes just because I like them. Financially I can, but emotionally I can't bring myself to. Just 2 months ago I bought a new PC that I've been saving up for over the course of a year and a half. That's money that I specifically set off to the side for the PC, making sure I got all my other necessities covered. And 2 months after buying it, I still feel buyer's remorse even though that's literally what the purpose of the money I set aside was for. Explaining crap like that to people who have never financially struggled is impossible, because they'll always say why worry? You can obviously afford it, and the annoying part is that they're right. My family didn't have a lot when I was growing up, so I learned to be a conservative spender from little on. I became a high schooler with no spending money, then a broke college kid, followed by saving for a wedding, then a house, then kids. It's literally only in the past few years that I'm able to afford luxury things without a second thought, and it still feels really weird. Overheard a 38-year-old grown butt man try to pick up my co-worker with the line, "I'm trying to get my dad to buy me a Jaguar this summer." She pretended to cough to hide the fact she was laughing. Had a lovely 89-year-old lady in my college chemistry class that told us about the depression meals her mother would make. A girl in my class response, "Why didn't your parents just get a job? Oh my." Most of us never got a say in what we wore, because hand-me-downs were the way to go. For example, I got my first brand new shirt that I got to pick out myself in high school, so people making fun of ill-fitting and out-of-style clothes. I skipped out of dances and social events at school a lot of this time for this reason. I considered it a privilege when my brother let me go through his closet, and most of the time, I didn't ask. When someone is shocked that a person of a certain age doesn't have savings. Being poor is expensive and most of the time you can't afford to put money into savings. My rent is late because of a recent lockdown and I'm being charged $18 because it's being paid late. First agency in 10 years of renting that uses unscrupulous methods to handle rent payments. It already costs $85 a year to use their direct debit system, and it's either that or a freaking money order. Being poor is the most expensive job I've ever had, besides working at the airport. Sadly it's shoes. If you're broke you run shoes until they absolutely cannot be worn anymore. Doesn't matter if this is paired with nice clothes, shoes are where people skimp. I know this from experience. If you want to see if someone is in dire financial straits, look at their shoes. I am better off now than in past, but still to this day I won't throw out shoes if they are still wearable. They run up the bill at a restaurant with cocktails for themselves and rounds for the table no one asked for, and then suggest everyone split the check evenly. I was brought up very poor. I now do okish for myself, but I've never lost the feeling of worry that I will be poor again. My kids are that now and it worries me a little, but because I've always had enough in their lifetime they don't know any better. If you've never been poor, you never understand just how horrible it can be. Never worry about hiding from the guy at the door wanting his money and you pretending you're not in because you don't get paid till tomorrow. Never had to make the contents of the fridge last till the end of the week or rely on benefits or government handouts for your clothes and accommodation or grandparents' generosity, etc. They just never have that worry on their shoulder. Life's problems for them are completely different. That nonchalant way you get through life is something you can never have unless you are born rich. Even if you become super rich later in life, I don't think you can have it. You have to be born with it. I hear you. Even after you finally do reach a comfortable level of finances, if you're lucky enough you're never happy to spend it. I used to be practically homeless with mountains of debt and creditors calling me every day to demand their money. These days I have thousands in the bank and I still cling to every last penny of it. I'll never have enough to stop worrying about it. When someone says there's more important things than money, always seems the people who say that are the ones with money. My best friend's pose ex said this a lot while she struggled to buy necessities for their son. Meanwhile he'd blow money on pre-order games that cost $60 plus. He was born with a silver spoon up his butt. Spent all of his inheritance on a new PC. Nothing went to his son. Sucker. They look down upon anybody with a manual labor low pay job. Warped sense of what's normal, i.e. new cars, vacations, eating out. I feel like people who have been poor or grown up poor, and even still are more willing to share or offer something they have, and my friends that have never had to worry about money don't just offer to share something. I think it's because poor people know what it's like to be without, don't like to ask for things, and they don't want anyone to have to ask or go without. People who have never worried about money have never had to share. If they wanted something for themselves they just bought it. I spend a lot of time interacting with homeless people in my area, and one of the most common things they tell me is that it's almost exclusively poorer people who give them money, food, clothes, help, or even a kind word or eye contact. Rich people either ignore them entirely or straight up verbally abuse them. They don't get it and start pushing when people politely decline invitations to expensive events. If you grew up poor, you know what it feels like to have to make up excuses to skip events that you just can't afford. It's humiliating, and you just hope that your friends accept that you can't go and don't ask questions. Some people, typically those who have never felt that shame, will get pushy or offer to just pay your way, which can make you feel worse. I had to explain this to my stepkid recently. She started acting like this. Pushing, asking why over and over, when a friend of hers couldn't go to the water park. She acts like this because she's A kid, and B, has never been felt poor. We knew the kid's mom was struggling with money, but to my stepkid, there had to be a reason he didn't want to go, because it just didn't compute that his mom couldn't just put up the money for him to go. We had to have a chat about how when someone declines your invitation, you either suggest doing something easier for your friend or accept their answer. I remember having friends invite me to things and after a while, invite me with the added "it's only $." I knew a girl who, if she paid for something with cash, would just throw the change into the trash receptacle because she didn't want to carry it around. This was in college. I was like, frick it, I'll carry that extra money around. You have to be joking. I'm poor and my roommate is very well off. It makes me mad when she doesn't take care of her things because she knows she get replace them. Another one is I hate when people buy pricey things on a whim. Because I don't have money, I double and triple check that the thing I'm getting is exactly what I want or need. The disappointment of realizing you just bought a crappy thing with your last $30 hits different than when you know you could have just as well bought 2 of those things. For a bit of context, I live in Denmark. I had a co-worker, Jay, once who I had the following interactions with. Me: sorry I'm a few minutes late. The train was running late due to actual horrible accident the day before. Jay: oh, why didn't you just take the car then? Me: I don't have a car. I can't afford it. Jay: but how do you go places then? Me: bicycle and public transport mostly. Jay: but how do you get to the bus station without a car? Me: a couple of months later, while a group of us at work are talking about summer plans. Jay: we are going to drive to Italy for the summer. Co-worker 1: oh that's nice. We are driving to visit family in France. Co-worker 2: we are just staying in country in our summer home. Me: we are going to Germany and around in Denmark. Jay: but how are you getting to Germany? Did you buy a car? Me: we are taking the train. Jay: but how do you get around once you're there without a car? Me: bus, U-Bahn and taxi. Jay: I really don't understand why you can't buy a car. Cars in Denmark are expensive. Even a cheap old car will cost you a lot in gas, insurance and taxes. Jay: just never understood the concept of not being able to afford a car. Cars are expensive, period. At least the reliable ones. My friend co-worker asking me why I didn't just buy a car still bothers me to this day. As though I wouldn't just go and get one if they were giving them out. Grocery shopping, not even looking at price tags. I didn't grow up super poor, but we weren't exactly super rich either. You take the extra 10 seconds and do a little comparison before you just grab the first whatever. Leaving a Publix or Whole Foods empty-handed is pretty embarrassing, but it is what it is. I lived with a girl in college who referred to her $50,000 salary as poverty wages, and not in like a woke leftist kind of way, but because she literally thought $50,000 was where the poverty line was, the bare minimum someone could live on. My family's combined income growing up was like $48,000. Depending upon where in the country you're living, 50k could be below the poverty line. In almost every major city in the country, 50k is well below median income, but if you're in a rural area then it's more than enough to live comfortably. I remember working with a guy that made a comment about having to buy a new shirt because one of his buttons fell off. I told him that he needed to just sew on a new button, and even showed him that if you turn up the bottom of the shirt, you will see two buttons. One that is used to button up the shirt and the other is for the cuffs, and the reason they are there is in case you lose a button. This is on most dress shirts. He looked at me with great disgust and said it wasn't his job to replace the button and it was much easier to just buy a new shirt. For your information, I have shirts that are easily over 20 years old, and this dude probably doesn't have one shirt that is over a year old. I'm fairly well off, but I hate this craze of buying new all the time. As a result, I rarely shop and have clothes that are at least 10 years old in my closet. Older the better, because it means I'm keeping my figure. I really hope that guy you worked with has a rude awakening. I had an idiotic, narcissistic roommate that once told me her family was so poor, they could only afford to redecorate their house once a year. WTF. I had no idea at that time people decorated their homes whatever shite we could afford was in ours for years. And that redecoration was a thing people did. I was much younger, and this was way before HGTV and all that junk. Forgetting what it's like to be poor is also a thing. My father grew up poor but is now middle class. When I tell him things like I can't afford a 401k and I don't have any savings, he's like, well, you should be putting back for your retirement anyway. Dude, WTF. Savings are no good if I don't have electricity. They don't recognize how much they've been handed. They truly believe they earned their place off the sweat of their own backs. I was poor growing up, but by my mid-20s my folks were doing okay, and when I went back to school they were able to let me stay with them, give me some money for tuition, let me inherit my grandpa's car, etc. I finally got myself on my feet when before that I was working like a dog and not getting freaking anywhere. You can't move up without help, and only those who've not had any will recognize that. Their hair is constantly nice and tidy, same haircut without deliberate growth, being able to afford regular, consistent salon barbershop costs. Naturally there are exceptions, but largely this is a good indicator. I used to stay with my ex a lot. My ex had a roommate, me, my ex, and his roommate all grew up relatively poor at one point or another. The roommate's GF, however, did not. One night we were all sitting around talking about how we'd like to travel one day when we got our finances situated. I mentioned I almost went on a trip to France with my French club, but money was an issue. Roommate's GF innocent chimes in with, oh, it's wonderful, you'd love it, you should really go. Roommate says, sweetie, not everyone's parents can afford to send them, or something of that nature. I think it was one of the moments that really emphasized the difference in our economic backgrounds. Saying if you don't like your job just quit. They have a security blanket, don't have to support themselves, so they can just leave a job without having another one lined up, and can't empathize with people who can't do that. Having a security blanket can cause people to display some pretty deplorable behavior too. They are miserable. I live very close to central London, about a 5-minute walk away from the Thames. I'm a 20-minute walk or so away from Belgravia, and a little further from Knightsbridge and Sloane Square. For shoots and giggles I sometimes go buy my groceries from the supermarkets in the aforementioned areas. For comparison, I live on a council estate and am dirt poor. When I go to my local grocery store I meet with other residents from my estate. We smile, say hi, maybe even stop or chat. Typical London grocery store experience. People talking on smartphones, small kids asking for stuff, parents saying yes or no, and so on. You've got an atmosphere. Meanwhile across the Thames in the wealthy parts there's no atmosphere. Nobody smiling. Everybody's miserable. God forbid you get in their way or stand between them and their fresh venison. You either get a hard stare or a curt excuse me, no please, no thank you. Note that I'm not writing about your typical middle class suburban types here, but seriously wealthy people I find most to be incredibly miserable and humorless. It's funny that a lot of robber barons grew up poor. Just because you're rich douche today doesn't mean you were never poor. People who argue against safety nets were probably never poor. Not true. I've spoken to people against safety nets who were poor. Part of it is trying to give sense to their suffering, as if the sacrifice by default made them better, while in reality, they are being exploited. They believe they're broke, and stress out and complain about it, and they have an obvious 1%er lifestyle. They're absolutely clueless about how rare their position in life really is. It's mind-boggling. I don't know how they can see all the poor and working poor around them, and come to their odd conclusions about their relative poverty. They don't know how much grocery costs, or that they could get it for cheaper prices if they know where to look, as in not Whole Foods. I remember moving to a new town and my mom and bro coming down to buy me groceries as a nice gesture. I recommended we go to Publix. My bro looked around at the cars in the parking lot and said this isn't where we're shopping, lol. If they have never had a job, been married, or make money in any way but they still have their own home and a Lamborghini. Saw someone saying that if your job underpays you 1 month, it fills up your next month's pay to cover the missing amount. There's no reason to get upset. After all, you got all the money you were owed, just some of it was delayed by a month. This was clearly someone who had never been living paycheck to paycheck. Making poor an identity and clearly being better off than their poor identity would actually allow them to be. I had a friend in school who clearly thought it was admirable to be the poor kid, but it turned out he was doing better than most of our friend group. The real experience of growing up poor usually suppresses any urge to brag about it, because it can be humiliating as frick. When I said I bought my first car myself and wondered why I didn't have my license in my 20s, she asked why couldn't your parents just buy it for you? Throwing away the toothpaste when it gets slow before rolling it. Throwing away the mayonnaise when it gets empty without scraping the sides. Never filling your shampoo bottle with water. Ditto for conditioner. Always buying the name brands, even when generic is equivalent and half the cost. They never lool at prices in the supermarket. They become genuinely surprised when people haven't traveled outside of their home country. They legitimately believe their experiences, privilege, are universal. True story. So you have to get a prenup when you get married. I know, well, how else do you protect your trust fund from his trust fund? She was dating a guy from another country at the time who literally lived off of beans and rice for 2 years so that his family had enough money to send him to school. They say money can't buy happiness. B. What kind of fake but imaginary problems do you have that money can't solve? Because literally every problem I've ever had I could solve with enough money to throw at it. I used to hear a lot of money isn't everything from a lot of people. Well, yeah, money isn't everything, but everything needs money. Watch how they treat anybody in a customer service role, retail, food and beverage, etc. There are exceptions. I know that. Commonly called out as a red flag in relationships and friendships. Very true. So annoying to witness. Heard a chef who was raised in a very wealthy family describing some poorly made food. He said, "It's like the cook left early and the cleaning lady had to make dinner." Ben from Below Deck Med on Bravo. LOL. That cracked me up. Children are never a burden or obstacle to wants, much less work. There's always a nanny, a sitter, boarding school, a tutor, whatever. OMG. I've never thought about privilege among parents. Feel free to expand. I'm unmarried and childless, so I DK what it's like to calculate childcare into my daily life. Row. I DK if this is really an indicator or not, but not checking the prices of food when you go to a restaurant and just ordering whatever looks good. Teenage kid with a fast car. Mustangs, Camaros, and other types of cars that you know some is too young to afford on their own, except for GME and AMC apes, but that's different. My first car was a 1982 Toyota Corolla that was still on the road in 1996. I bought it for $300 and also spent some money on new parts for it. I earned this money from my first job at an amusement park where I would observe rich kids with fast cars blowing through rolls of quarters on video arcade games and skee ball. My car was earned, and this a different feeling than being given something. That's why I prefer to keep the company of people that had to start from scratch. I remember that after I'd put myself through college and was starting off in the business world, these clueless folks would tell me that I needed to go to networking events and to join clubs. I was paying off school loans, I'd had to buy a car for the job, plus the insurance and gas, so the last thing that I could afford was to pay for a cocktail or two at a higher end bar, or join some club to network. I was drinking 1/2 a billion cube in a mug of water for lunch and eating a 1/2 head of plain lettuce for dinner. One guy tried to tell me he grew up poor, while also telling me his mother was a pharmacist. His example was eating buttered crackers as a good snack. I ate that too. You weren't actually poor, you just liked low effort and crappy snacks like the rest of us. Leaving lights on in rooms they are not in. Also leaving the tap running in the sink and walking away. Psychopathic behaviors. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.